All right, final topic. Bayern Munich drop points against Mainz. Maybe they should just bail the points to Mainz from now on, Stefan.
Yeah, I mean, can we just talk about how Mainz just, ironically, the club named the Carnival Club love to spoil a party. They also did it with Borussia Dortmund a few seasons ago. And yeah, look, it's not exactly a title decider, shall we say. But it was a game where they really did spoil the kind of good vibes of Bayern
Mm-hmm.
Munich that they've kind of managed to harbour over the last kind of couple of weeks. Kind of thought, obviously Harry Kane's been out, but Bayern have kind of managed to kind of scrape by, and everyone kind of thought maybe they might be okay here. Thomas Muller's put in an admirable, if not perfect, performance up front. Um, Vincent, I say Vincent. I recently found out it's not actually Vincent. He wants to be named after, pronounced as his French way, although I need to double check that before, so I'll try and remember that for the next episode. But anyway, Kompany.
Vinny Company. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Vinny. Yeah, I think he likes Vinny. Obviously didn't play, rest a few players for this game, I think, or maybe it was kind of down to the bare bones, obviously. The most obvious one was, of course, Upamecano, who was rested for fear of picking up a fifth yellow card of the season, which obviously led to him picking up a suspension, which meant Eric Dyer came into the side to limited performances. Obviously, Guerrero came in for Alphonso Davies. Wasn't a great performance either. And yeah, I don't know. It was just feel like in these kind of situations you don't want to go too hard on Bayern being rubbish, because you want to give some credit to Mainz, because I thought Mainz were outstanding, and I would say their second goal in particular is definitely worth looking up on YouTube or wherever you get your Bundesliga highlights, because it really was outstanding. I thought Lee was great in this game. Obviously, and as you said at the top of the show, the fact that they were able to do all this with Burkhardt going off injured after, how long was it? Like 15 minutes, I think. Great for Mainz, who have undoubtedly been one of the most kind of overperforming teams in the Bundesliga this season. But Bayern, I don't know, man. I don't know how we kind of approach this one, because I kind of posted, sorry. I tweeted on Blue Sky, tweeted on Threads that Bayern were
Flight?
now.
Is that it?
Yeah, I flew towards them while dropping words of wisdom. That, if I'm not mistaken, Bayern are now 2 points, I think, behind where they were at this stage last season. And I kind of wanted to quantify that all by saying I do understand that Vincent Kompany has done some things well at Bayern, and there's some individual performances that are working out well. Some players who are definitely thriving under him. The team itself is playing better, I would say, in terms of the way they, just aesthetically speaking, the way they're just far more fun to watch. But at the end of the day, they are 2 points behind where they were last season. It just comes down, man, to whether that's because of Vincent Kompany or the squad that he's inherited. And
Yeah.
I'll let you jump in here, then I'll maybe speak in a minute, because I've got some thoughts on it.
I think it's the squad. I think Kompany is a good coach. I think he's playing more aesthetically pleasing football than Thomas Tuchel. He's trying to solve the same issues that Thomas Tuchel had. He tries to solve them in a different way, doesn't he? More diplomatically, more creatively. Tuchel is the elephant in the China shop, isn't he? When he doesn't like something, he will let it know. He will let it know everyone who can listen. I think the English FA is going to learn this the hard way very soon. And I personally, I still maintain this. I think Thomas Tuchel is an excellent coach. I'm not going to rewrite or re-speak what I said last year. I think if Thomas Tuchel had stayed at Bayern Munich, they would probably face many of the same issues that we were going to face under Kompany eventually as well. Because I'm saying eventually as well, because sooner or later, and I said this all year long, sooner or later this team is going to run into a wobble, because there's going to be injuries. There's going to be lots of matches, and then they're going to drop points. It's happened. I think too, the one thing that really helps them is that, the other teams around them haven't been great. We've mentioned this already. That's why they're first now, even though they're worse in terms of points and goal production and defense and everything. I put this on Blue Sky yesterday as well. I put the two tables next to each other, where they were. And they're first this year and we're second last year. But, it's interesting because I think a lot of it comes down to the squad. I think there's a lot of shortcomings in the squad in general, and a lot of them Kompany is starting to fix. I mean, this defense is better. It looks better. It looks more solid. It still has its moments of madness, like it did against Barcelona or against Eintracht Frankfurt, right? It had its moments of madness in this game. I think there is the problem that you have an aging goalkeeper who is currently out with a rib injury, and then you have a goalkeeper who I think Daniel Peretz is a very talented goalkeeper, Stefan. I actually think they should stick with him. I think they should just give it to him and say, look, you are going to be our number one. I think he brings a lot to this team that the team can like. I think he's worthwhile pursuing as a project, but he's not there yet. And that's fine. The two defenders that Kompany is fixed or starting to fix, that's just two of them, right? Eric Dyer comes in, who hasn't played much, and he's not up to speed. That's I think fair to say. Konrad Laimer plays at times as a right back, or Guerrero plays at times as a right back. They can easily be found out. I mean, Jamie Gittens exposed Leimer's lack of speed in that 1-1 draw against Dortmund. On the left, Davies, when he's out, I think Davies is playing a really good season this year. You can tell he's in a contract year. But behind that, it's thin, isn't it? Sasha Bowey was a terrible transfer. I think that's safe to say now. It's a waste of money. The fact that they paid 30 million euros for him is criminal, in my opinion. In the attack, Michael Olise, I thought was a really good transfer. But other than Jama Musiala, Olise, and Kane, it's pretty thin there as well. So if one or two of them are not working, where else is the creativity going to come from? Leroy Sané scores in this, but we're increasingly getting into the situation where we know the club is going to walk away from that contract. Kingsley Coman, he has his moments, but he's always hurt. Serge Gnabry, I think Kompany tried, but that too didn't quite work. Mathis Tel, who knows what's going on there. I think in midfield, actually, they're in a really good place. Leon Goretzka, I think his resurgence is noticeable. Pavlovic is a world talent. There's no doubt about it. He's the future of the club together with Jamal Musiala. He is what you need to build everything around. I think Kimmich is actually playing a pretty decent year too. That's not the issue. The issue is really in the attack, and the issue is lack of depth in defense, and that gets easily exposed, doesn't it? Sometimes they don't score enough, and then when they leak a couple goals, then they can't overcome that like they did in past years. 2 or 3 years ago, Mainz scores 2 goals against them, and then Leroy Sané would have made it 2-1, and we would have all known, they're getting a second and a third, no problem, even if for just 5 minutes. Now they get a goal back, and we're like, yeah, that's too late. And that's because, it doesn't have that same... They're just not as dangerous as they used to be. And I think that is something that needs to be addressed. I personally think this is a long haul job. I think this is going to take a long time, and it's probably worth an entire podcast on its own. I think that they're also lacking a little bit of an identity. I said this in the chat. I am happily to repeat this here. Bayern Munich were always at the best when 5 to 6 guys in that team were homegrown. They don't have to be German. David Alaba was Austrian, right? But the spine of the Bayern Munich were always historically, and this is not just the last golden generations, the golden generations before that, there was always 5 or 6 guys that had at least spent a significant time in the academy of the club, right? That's why I think it's smart to build this team around Stanisic, Pavlovic, Musiala. These are not all, like Musiala, yeah, he has a very different background, but he spent a significant portion at the academy. He knows what Bayern Munich is like, right? These are the guys you need. And Bayern Munich are not a Premier League team that can just buy their way to success. They're trying that. I think it's not going to be successful. Their way is more the Barcelona way. They need to have a spine of players that really know the club to the core, that know how to deal with the really different mentality that takes place in Munich. And I think as long as they don't address that, we're going to just go from makeshift to makeshift to makeshift to makeshift to makeshift. And they might win a title again this year, but they're not going to be that Champions League contender dominating the league that they did in the years past until they address that to the core, I think. That's a long-winded answer, by the way. I'm sorry.
No, you're quite right. I mean, I've literally been reduced to tears, not quite because of my upset over Bayern's situation, obviously because I've got a very heavy cold at the minute, but I'm trying to hold in the sneezes and all sorts. But reduced to tears all the same. No, look, I completely agree with everything you said. You only have to look at our starting 11. Being obviously Eric Dyer's a key one. He should be nowhere near this Bayern Munich team. He shouldn't be the third choice. Should be the fourth choice. Should be the fifth choice central defender. Felt quite notable to me, and I've seen this. This isn't the first time I've seen this, but Kim, when Upamecano goes out this team, really reverts back to a very kind of error-prone player, which is quite interesting, and probably quite a worry for Vincent Kompany, which I'm sure he picked up. Both fullbacks. Konrad Laimer is not a fullback. I know he's done a decent job there at times, but that doesn't excuse the fact that they've been playing a central midfielder at right back for most of the season. If it's not him, it's Kimmich. It's the same sort of thing. Rafael Guerreiro is a player who wasn't good enough for Dortmund, but then obviously moved to Bayern Munich as a backup. And, he can play as a central midfielder at times, and he's decent in the final third, but by no means competent wing-back or competent full-back. And actually, I'd go so far as to say Mainz actually targeted him for much of this game. You then add the likes of Leroy Sané, Thomas Müller, Kingsley Coman, Serge Gnabry to that list. And, you've got a whole kind of, I was saying to someone on social media, they've probably got about 7 or 8 senior players in that team that should have been about 2 seasons ago. And they haven't. And it's a concern because, Max Abel was asked after this game, will you go out and buy a striker in January? He says, no, we don't need one. And almost in the same breath, there's these reports about them extending. Well, okay, yeah. Well, this is my point. Like they're talking about that, and then they talk about, there's a lot of reports in Germany right now that Manuel Neuer is going to get a contract extension. Why? Why would you give Manuel Neuer unless it's some sort of deal to like transition into a head coach, which I think would be great, or not a head coach, but a coach, because he's probably still got plenty to offer Bayern Munich, and it's important that they kind of keep these big figures at the club, but. I don't know. I'll be keeping my eyes on Bayern Munich in a January transfer window, because I think it's quite interesting if you kind of look at the press in Germany and in Munich right now, and Banner, this more than anyone, that the Munich press get the knives out very quickly. The pressure isn't so much on Vincent Kompany at this point. The pressure is on Max Eberl. He's the one that's getting the criticism. He's the one that's perceived to be under pressure. He's the one that's perceived to be his job is on the line. And although you would never kind of wish for anyone to lose their job, I think that's actually quite accurate, because, the issues in this team aren't so much Vincent Kompany's tactics. You could maybe make some arguments that he's maybe been a bit naive at times in the Champions League, but that's by the by. The issue is that this is now the third head coach in 5 seasons, who is clearly a decent head coach, but is being held back by huge problems in this team. And Bayern just continue to overlook that. We had this huge discussion over the course of the weekend in our subscriber chat with a lot of our subscribers who, as you can imagine, a lot of them are Bayern Munich fans, and you were discussing the Florian Wirtz news that he probably will sign a contract extension at Bayer Leverkusen.
Or maybe already has.
Or maybe he already has, yeah, absolutely. And, we had some upset Bayern Munich fans, and we were saying, look, Bayern Munich were never going to sign Florian Wirtz this summer. And just like they never signed Erling Haaland, like they never signed Jude Bellingham, they never signed Kai Havertz, they're not really in the habit of spending a lot of money every season the way that a Chelsea or, a PSG or a Manchester City or whoever else will. And I think there's something noble in that, for obviously making sure that you don't go into a loss or you don't lose money. But they do like to sing and dance about making record profits and having X amount of money in the bank. And at times it does kind of feel like they've really taken the eye off the squad and the need for investment. And it's so much easier to just offer a contract extension to the likes of Serge Gnabry or Kingsley Coman rather than go out and spend 60 million euros on a top-class winger. I know they obviously did that with Mike Oliseh, so I understand that they've done that to an extent. But they need 2 or 3 Mike Olisehs. They need at least 2 Thomas Müllers, Harry Kanes. They need an extra Upamecano or 2. They need a right back. They don't have a right back in this team. They got Sasha Bowey, and as you said, the jury's still on him. And it's a minor miracle that Alphonso Davies has actually performed well this season, because for the last 2 seasons he's been doing very little. And if they had the Alphonso Davies from last season playing in this team, they'd have even more issues. So there's compromises all over this team, and I don't think Bayern Munich have any real excuses for that.
No, they don't. And I mean, there's so much talk about Florian Wirtz, and you know my opinion about this. There's Paul Wanner right there. He scored another beautiful goal today. He's performing in an incredible level, and like people saying like, well, he's not ready yet. Yeah, but he might be ready in 6 months. You know, and Thomas Müller broke into the side as an 18-year-old. David Alaba did too. Sooner or later you have to commit to whether you have to say to Paul Wanner, look, we're going to bank on you or not. And if Wirtz isn't coming, it will have to be Paul Wanner. And he is someone from your academy. He is the sort of player that, identifies with the club and has been at the club. You can't have the same situation as you had with an Angelo Stiller, who now plays at Stuttgart. And if you bring Stiller back, that's 50 million euros. That's just the reality of it. And this is a player that you already had in your squad. I mean, I think they're quite smart in targeting Tom Bischoff from Hoffenheim. He seems like a natural Leon Goretzka replacement. That is the sort of player you need to target now, because as you also pointed out in the chat, in 2 years, if Bischoff goes to Leipzig and plays well there, he's not affordable for Bayern anymore, right?
Yeah, like I said in the chat, if a player's already starting for a top four side in the Bundesliga, they're already past Bayern Munich's grasp, really, within reason, obviously. You can also, but that's when they start competing with the richest clubs in the Premier League, which is something that Bayern obviously have tried to avoid to do.
And always have, historically, always have. This is not new. This goes back to the 90s when they had to deal with rich Italian clubs and rich teams from Spain. They got these guys before they became big stars. They became the finished product of Bayern, and then most of the time Bayern were able to hold on to them. But they didn't sign the big stars from other Bundesliga teams. That rarely happened. It's a narrative that got created because Bayern Munich signed 2 from Dortmund, literally 2, right? That's where the narrative comes from, and it's a completely fake narrative, a lazy narrative that gets so overplayed and has not happened since and never happened before. And I think that is something that people really need to keep in mind. And that's like, Bischoff is a perfect candidate. He is still in the range. He will cost them about 20 million euros. I think the same was true for Uri Traogo, who's probably now out of their grasp, because if he becomes a star at Leipzig, they can't afford him anymore. I think there's a ton there at Bayern Munich that, is probably beyond the rest of the scope of this podcast. We will have a lot of Christmas content and winter break content, Stefan, so we can probably sit down and do a full show on this for our subscribers, because I think it's really worth discussing.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll discuss all the transfer stuff in the weeks to come, no doubt. And yeah, but in terms of the actual football, congratulations to Mainz, because that's a very big win for them, great. And they're doing very well in the league. We'll definitely do a deep dive into them soon. But yeah, for Bayern, another frustrating result, I would say.
Yeah, and you know what? It does to the Bundesliga. It brings everything nicely back together. We have a title race. Leipzig can make things really interesting on Friday. And that's what we want. I don't care necessarily if Bayern win the title in the end or not. I just want it to last to the very end. That's what I'm here for. So yeah, sorry, Uli Hoeneß, I disagree with you. The title isn't quite in Munich yet. I think he might have to eat those words. But anyways, let's wrap this up. We're over time anyways, as it is.